Here's the million-dollar question. What if you actually like your representative or your senator or your county supervisor? What do you do then? What if you're one of those people who's been blessed with a progressive representative who was inspired to run for office by Bernie himself? It might be a big ask, ordering you not to vote for AOC or Ilhan Omar if you live in their districts. But that's only true insofar as you actually believe that they are on the left. I happen to think they're all full of shit. I mean, they talk the talk, sometimes, but the problem with all of these so-called progressives in Congress is that while they say the things that left-wingers like to hear, when it comes time to vote, they vote like ordinary Democrats. Whether it's funding our bloated military, Donald Trump's white supremacist border wall, or ICE, which AOC specifically campaigned against 2 years ago, reauthorizing the Patriot Act, bailing out corporations during the pandemic, the progressive members of Congress vote no differently than any other Democrats. AOC does not vote differently than Joe Crowley would have. She does not vote differently than her primary challenger in June would have. Sorry, everyone. I know we're constantly being told by the progressive media that we're actually making progress. Everyone did a victory lap in June because one guy, Jamal Bowman, primaried an incumbent. But we don't know how Representative Bowman is going to vote. Odds are he'll be a reliable Democratic vote, just like all the other self-identifying progressives in the House, just like St. Bernie in the Senate. There were signs of trouble right out of the gate, after the midterms in 2018. Do you remember how there was this big to-do about whether all those new progressives were going to support Nancy Pelosi's bid for Speaker of the House? Of course it didn't matter, because she ran unopposed, but there was some suspense about whether they would symbolically vote against her. It should have been a red flag right there on January 3rd, 2019, when they all voted for her. The progressives wouldn't even symbolically oppose Democratic leadership on day one when there was nothing at stake. No legislation, no money, no election coming up. Just, do you think that Nancy Pelosi should be Speaker of the House? And every single one of those fake progressives said, she's fine. I don't have a problem with her corruption or her willingness to side with the Republicans. These people are progressives in name only. It's just marketing. It's for campaigning and tweeting. There may have been a time when they actually believed it, but then they got elected. The Democratic Party corrupts absolutely. Even Bernie Sanders, who's the most powerful of them all, when it comes time to oppose the Democratic establishment, he's too busy voting with them. I think the most egregious offense committed by all the fake progressives in Congress is voting in favor of the CARES Act in late March of this year. I don't know if anyone even remembers that bill. It was the one where Democrats and Republicans pulled $6 trillion out of thin air, bailed out the airlines and the cruise line industry, and created a $4 trillion slush fund for the Treasury Department to administer with no oversight. It was also the bill with the $1,200 checks for some people, not everyone. This all came together in a matter of weeks with no hearings, no feedback from constituents, and no real oversight written into the bill. It's funny, isn't it? Whenever the Democrats want to pay, or whenever the left wants to pay for something, the Republicans and the Democrats are like, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? But when they want to pay for something, they just harvest money from the money trees that grow out of their asses. As far as we know, every member of Congress voted in favor of the CARES Act. Every senator definitely did. But the House vote was a secret, which doesn't sound like something you do in a democracy. What happened, I think, was that representatives were starting to get really worried about the deadly virus that was going around. A lot of members of Congress are very old, and even though they are essential workers, they didn't feel like risking their lives to show up for work. So as long as no one opposed the bill, everyone could stay home, and the bill became law without an official record of how everyone voted. There was one Republican who tried to mount an opposition, but no one else would join him. Not any of the so-called libertarians or any of the so-called progressives, all of whom should have been ideologically opposed to corporate bailouts. There wasn't a lot of outrage either from the progressive media. Bernie was praised for heroically getting some extra assistance into the bill for gig workers, even though it turned out that he wasn't the one who did that. There was some hope that the oversight mechanisms in the bill would keep the Treasury Department honest about distributing trillions of dollars. But most people in the progressive media never really grasped the enormity of the bill. Maybe that's because progressive members of Congress weren't acting like it was a big deal. But progressive commentators are supposed to be the thoughtful ones, and yet a massive corporate bailout and upward transfer of wealth somehow didn't move the needle on the left. The only person I'm aware of who actually made a big deal about the CARES Act was Jimmy Dore. I have to say, I'm not a huge fan. I randomly started watching his videos on YouTube literally a few nights after the election in 2016. I thought he was nuts. He was practically a Trump supporter, and he had all these conspiracy theories about the Russians and the emails. So after a few months of watching his videos off and on, I just couldn't take it anymore. But this past March, the YouTube algorithm started recommending his videos again, and curiosity got the better of me. And let me tell you, he was on fire. He was still doing the pro-Trump stuff and the conspiracy theories. But in terms of all the stimulus bills that Congress was passing back then, Jimmy was appropriately irate. In fact, he was being ruthless before that was even a thing. He wasn't afraid to criticize the progressive members of Congress, all the way up to Bernie himself. The dominant narrative on the left was that the Democrats had no choice but to support the bad parts of the bill in order to get the good parts. It was those mean Republicans who forced the Democrats to vote for the corporate bailouts and the slush fund by putting it in the same bill as the stimulus checks. But as Jimmy and his guests pointed out all spring, over and over and over, the Democrats were not forced to do anything. Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi helped write the bill. Whatever went into it was pre-approved by them. They allowed the corporate bailouts and the people's meager bailout to be combined into one bill. Those matters could have been handled separately, but then everyone voting in favor of the corporate bailouts would have looked really bad. So everything was combined into one bill. The Democrats got to give a performance about how they had no other choice, but there was no acknowledgement that they control the House of Representatives. No bill can become a law without at least some Democrats voting in favor of it. That sounds like leverage to me. What it is veto power, actually. Corporations didn't have to get a single penny if Democrats didn't want them to. That bill contained exactly what the Democrats wanted, except they probably would have preferred not to do the $1,200 checks because that's expensive and you don't want to have people dependent on the government. And all of this happened without a whimper of protest from the supposed left-wingers in Congress. They all voted for it, and then they did interviews boasting about the great benefits that were in the bill for regular people. I thought the least they could have done was symbolically vote no, even though the bill was going to pass anyway. But that was weak on my part. Jimmy Dore had the vision. He wanted more. He called on progressives in Congress to bring out the big guns. Rather than just keeping the bill a secret in Congress, the progressives should have made as much noise as possible. They should have mobilized their constituents and their supporters nationwide against the bill. Also, this was back in March, when Bernie was sort of still running for president. He had a lot of supporters back then to leverage against Congress. There could have even been an alliance between progressives and libertarians, whatever it took to stop the bill. Jimmy wanted Bernie and the progressives to organize a national rent strike, mortgage strike, essential workers strike, even shut down the Amazon warehouses. That would have brought about the downfall of the American empire in a matter of days. Basically, shut the whole country down until progressives extracted massive concessions from Congress. Medicare for all, rent and mortgage relief, debt relief, UBI, hazard pay for essential workers, and full funding for voting by mail. But of course, the progressives didn't get any of that. They didn't even try. I do have to say, trying to force Medicare for all from a Republican-controlled Senate and White House, that's ballsy. I like it. There would have been just as much resistance from House Democrats, but then they would have looked bad. That's a good thing. But Medicare for all was never even on the table. The point that Jimmy Dore was making was If not now, when? If Democrats and Republicans in Congress still don't feel any pressure, any sense of urgency to pass Medicare for all during a pandemic, when will they? It's never going to happen unless they're forced. But the left isn't going to force anything because there is no left. There's no leadership, not in Congress, not among us civilians. There's no grand plan to get all this stuff done. We're just idolizing a handful of fake left-wingers in Congress, thinking they're the future. But they're not. They're just Democrats. During an unprecedented public health and economic crisis, what were they doing? Did they step up and lead? Did they force all those antiquated Republicans and Democrats to do the right thing for the actual people in this country? No. Did they go on TV and tell the mainstream media, "We told you so"? We told you that we needed social safety nets in place, ready to go? Did Rashida Tlaib go on TV and say that? No. Did AOC do that? No. She voted to give corporations $5 trillion, and then she went and handed out bags of food to her starving constituents. That's what her priorities were. If you live in her district and you are a taxpayer, you are paying to bail out the airline industry. You are paying to bail out the cruise line industry, an industry that is not headquartered in the United States. I'll say that again. You are paying to bail out an industry that is not here. But you didn't get to vote on that. Your representative made that decision for you. They all did. Bill Parcells used to say, "You are what your record says you are." It saddens me to report that all the so-called progressives in Congress are actually corporate Democrats. And the corporations are getting a really sweet deal on this. They get the progressives' votes without even having to make campaign contributions. The least that all those Justice Democrats could do is start taking corporate money. If they're going to get into office and just vote to enrich corporations, then they should stop asking regular folks to pay for their re-election campaigns. Corporations need to start paying for that. But in the meantime, if you're on the left, don't vote for any progressive Democrats who voted for the CARES Act, which would be all of them. And don't vote for any progressive candidates for any office who are known to be Biden supporters. I know it may be hard to say no to them. We've been waiting so long to have real left-wingers to vote for, but they fucked up. They sided with the corporations. They sided with the Democratic establishment. That's what they are. They don't care about us. The party is what matters most to them. If Bernie himself were running for re-election in the Senate, I would say don't vote for him either. He's the worst out of all of them. He's got the most power, the biggest microphone, the most supporters, and he doesn't use any of it. And now there's this whole new generation of fake progressives, made in Bernie's image, getting elected to Congress, and being just as weak as he is. Don't vote for any of them. It doesn't matter how overwhelmingly blue the district is. It doesn't matter if they're running unopposed. They don't deserve your vote. And you let them know that. Now. Not in November. Right now. They are not getting your vote. They had their chance to do the right thing in a crisis, and they didn't do it. They give trillions of dollars to corporations, not their constituents. They should be ashamed of themselves. What they did is unforgivable. Unless they say the magic words. Don't vote for Joe Biden. Now, if AOC, Ayanna Pressley, Ro Khanna, and Pramila Jayapal tell their constituents not to vote for Biden, is that going to cause him to lose 4 very blue states? Probably not. But these representatives are all national figures. I'm sure there are Bernie supporters in swing states who would love to be told by someone like the great AOC, don't vote for Joe Biden. We are all not voting for him, and he will lose because of that. He needs to drop out. I can think of 2 representatives right off the top of my head who actually do have the power to single-handedly cause Joe Biden to lose their states. They are Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. All they have to do is tell their constituents, don't vote for Joe Biden. We deserve better. And that's it. Hillary Clinton famously lost Michigan by 10,000 votes. Rashida Tlaib won her district 2 years ago by receiving 165,000 votes. 4 years ago, Minnesota was teetering on the brink of becoming a red state. Hillary won by 1.5%, or 44,000 votes. Ilhan Omar won her district 2 years ago with 267,000 votes. That's actually more votes that Bernie received in the entire state in this year's primary. I'm sure that if Representatives Tlaib and Omar instruct their constituents not to vote for Biden, people will hear that message all across the country. When you're a national figure, whether you're a politician or a celebrity, your words carry weight. And I believe that there are many people out there who want to be told by someone they respect, like a member of Congress, that Joe Biden is unacceptable and we're taking a stand against him before it's too late. But unfortunately, no progressive members of Congress have done that yet, and they're not going to unless their constituents force them. These fake progressives are perfectly content to enrich corporations and participate in the normalizing of Joe Biden as an acceptable alternative to Trump. He's not. He's not fit to serve, and he will do nothing to make people's lives better. All the progressive politicians are getting a pass from the progressive media and their constituents. That has to stop. Do not vote for them unless they cut ties with Joe Biden. That is the only way they can begin to atone for how they voted while in office.